Hi there, I'm Shanda, and this is the story of how my parents canceled my 14th birthday, all to keep my entitled little brother happy. But worse than the canceled party was the realization that it wasn't just about one day. It was about years of being invisible, years of standing in the background while someone else stole my place. How do you survive when your own family teaches you that you don't matter? Have you ever felt like you were just a guest in your own family? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story too. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and stale coffee, a typical Sunday scent in Charleston. Summer had just begun sinking its teeth into the town. Air thick and sticky, windows cracked open but offering no relief. I sat at the kitchen table, spreading out my handmade invitations like fragile little dreams, each one carefully addressed, each corner pressed flat under my palm. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until my 14th birthday. Maybe this time things would be different. I traced the letters of my name on the invitations, imagining smiles, balloons, maybe even a small cake that said "Happy Birthday, Shanda" in swirly frosting. Not much to ask for, just a day that was mine. When Mom called me downstairs that afternoon, I thought she might ask about decorations or the guest list. Instead, I found both her and Dad waiting at the kitchen table. The air felt wrong, too still, too staged. Dad cleared his throat. Mom gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk, honey," she said, folding her hands like a news anchor about to deliver a disaster. "We think it's better if we don't have a party this year." My breath hitched. "What?" Dad sighed, looking everywhere but at me. "Colby's been sensitive lately. His therapist says big gatherings could upset him." But it's my birthday," I said, voice thinner than I intended. Mom reached across the table but didn't touch me. "You'll still get some gifts, maybe a cake here at home. Quiet, just family." The words crumbled around me like dry leaves. I nodded because that's what good daughters do when they have no real choice. But inside, something cracked. It wasn't the first time my life was trimmed down to accommodate Colby's needs. It just felt heavier now, harder to swallow. The weight of it followed me to school. I tried to keep it buried, but it slipped out between conversations, leaked into my silences. My friends noticed first, my too careful shrugs, the way my eyes darted away when birthdays were mentioned. "Your party's still on, right?" Emma asked, confusion lacing her voice. I hesitated too long. Words spread like spilled ink. Teachers offered awkward smiles. Neighbors mentioned it casually. "Shame about your birthday, sweetie," as if commenting on the weather. Mom's phone buzzed nonstop for 2 days. Facebook threads simmered with subtle judgment. A few brave souls even called her out directly. How could they cancel their daughter's birthday like that? I thought maybe they'd reconsider. Maybe embarrassment would do what love hadn't. But instead, Mom stormed into my room one night, phone still clutched in her hand. "You had no right," she hissed. "Telling people our business like that. You're grounded." I didn't argue. I just sat there, staring at the blank ceiling, listening to the walls close in. It wasn't the first birthday they had ruined, but it was the first time I knew. Something inside me had cracked for good. The days after the canceled party felt heavier than any summer humidity. The house seemed to sag under the weight of unspoken disappointment. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, careful not to disturb the fragile peace Mom and Dad were pretending still existed. I told myself, it was just a bad stretch. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe I was imagining it. One afternoon, on my way to the kitchen for a glass of water, I heard them whispering. Their voices floated from the living room, low and rushed. "She won't even notice," Mom said. "It'll cheer him up," Dad added, almost like a justification. Curiosity pulled me closer, heart pounding harder with every step. I peeked around the corner and saw it. The small box with the bracelet I'd picked out 6 months ago, resting in Mom's hands. The one I'd stared at in the store window for weeks, the one I'd dropped hints about in every conversation. "It's perfect for Colby," Mom said, already sliding it into a new gift bag with blue tissue paper. The realization hit like a sucker punch. Even the things meant for me were more valuable when handed to someone else. I pressed my back against the wall, feeling the coolness of the paint seep through my shirt. I stayed there long after the wrapping rustled and their conversation turned to dinner plans. In that quiet moment, I learned something vital. I wasn't just forgotten. I was expendable. The next day, Colby tore open the gift in front of a few of his friends from school. He held the bracelet high, flashing it around like it was some rare treasure, not even noticing the way my hands trembled at my sides. "Cool, huh?" he said, not to me, but to the room. No one corrected him. No one even glanced in my direction. It was as if I had been erased completely, my wants and wishes wiped away with a single careless decision. I watched the scene unfold with a numbness that scared me. There were no tears this time, just a tightening inside my chest, a hollowing out I couldn't stop. That night, lying in bed with the cheap ceiling fan ticking overhead, I made a promise to myself. Next time, I wouldn't bother asking. I wouldn't expect or hope or try to belong to something that had already decided where I stood. I thought back, suddenly, to all the other times things had quietly slipped through my fingers. The bicycle, the toys, the weekend spent waiting for promises that never came. None of it had seemed so cruel until now, pieced together in the dim light of this new clarity. Maybe I had been a placeholder all along, an extra body filling the spaces between Colby's victories and tantrums, a supporting role in a story where the spotlight would never, ever fall on me. As I watched my little brother flash my bracelet like a trophy, I realized maybe this family had decided long ago who mattered, and it was never going to be me. It wasn't just this birthday. It wasn't just this year. As I lay in bed the night after Colby paraded my bracelet around, the memories started crawling back, unwanted but unstoppable. I thought about another birthday, 2 summers ago, the day I thought, foolishly, that maybe I was finally going to have something all to myself. The sun had scorched Charleston that day. Dad had driven up with a shiny new bicycle tied to the roof of the car, the metallic paint flashing like a promise. I had stood there on the driveway, mouth open, heart racing. A brand new bike, not a hand-me-down, not something picked secondhand from a neighbor's garage sale. Mine. At least, that's what I thought. Before I could even reach for it, Mom clapped her hands together. "Now remember, it's for both of you," she said brightly, like she was announcing a prize at a school raffle. Colby darted forward, his fingers already leaving smudges on the handlebars. By the time I blinked, he had peeled a neon sticker from his backpack and slapped it across the frame. Colby, in big, crooked letters. I looked up at Dad, waiting for him to correct it, to say something, anything. But he just laughed. "It's good practice. You two have to learn to share." The sting was sharp, immediate. I forced a smile, like I always did, swallowing the lump in my throat. I stood back as Colby took the first ride, weaving unsteadily down the street, while I clapped because no one else would. The bike, of course, was his from that moment on. Whenever I asked to ride it, he threw tantrums. Dramatic, loud, unbearable. Eventually, Mom said it wasn't worth upsetting him. Better to let it be. And I did. I let it be. I let it go. Months passed. I started walking everywhere again, the way I always had. I stopped asking about the bike, stopped even looking at it. Until one gray morning in early fall, when I wandered out behind the shed and found it. The frame bent awkwardly, tires flat, the chain sagging like a broken necklace. Rust bloomed across the once shiny paint, dull and ugly. It leaned against the fence like a forgotten toy. I stood there, staring at it, at what was supposed to be mine. The wind tugged at the loose spokes, making a hollow whistling sound that filled the silence around me. I thought about how quickly Colby had moved on, how easily everyone had acted like it didn't matter, how they all did, every time. It was never about sharing. It was about reminding me that nothing I touched would ever truly be mine. Not a bicycle, not a bracelet, not even a simple, ordinary birthday party. I felt a strange calm settle over me, heavy and final. Maybe you stop reaching after a while. Maybe you learn to make your fists into pockets, to hide the ache of empty hands. I brushed my fingers along the peeling paint one last time. The letters of his name were still there, barely visible through the grime. I stared at the bent frame and the peeling paint and knew, Whatever part of me still believed they saw me, it rusted away right along with that bike. The middle school auditorium smelled faintly of old carpet and nervous excitement. Rows of parents fidgeted in metal chairs, clutching their phones, ready to record proud moments. For once, I thought, I might actually have a moment that belonged to me. They had called the house the week before. My name on the honor roll list, straight A's, perfect attendance, a special mention for leadership in the community project. I had ironed my best dress the night before, a soft blue one that made me feel like the sky itself had settled on my shoulders. Maybe today would be different. I sat between Mom and Dad, my stomach twisting not from fear, but from hope. Colby, of course, was restless beside me, swinging his legs and whining about being bored. When the principal started reading names, my heart pounded in my ears. Then, there it was. Shanda, last name, recognized for outstanding achievement. I stood, heart hammering, legs trembling. I barely made it 2 steps before Mom's hand grabbed my wrist. "Take Colby with you," she hissed under her breath, her smile brittle and frozen. I blinked at her, confused, but her hand tightened. "Go," Dad muttered. I turned. Colby, beaming now that he was included, clutched my fingers and practically dragged me up the aisle. The cameras flashed, just like I had imagined, only not for me. Every angle seemed to catch Colby's laughing face, his wide gestures. When the principal shook my hand, I could barely hear his words over the clapping that felt strangely distant, disconnected. I didn't feel proud. I felt invisible. Later that week, the school newsletter arrived home in our mailbox. Mom read it out loud, her voice high with pride. "Congratulations to Colby, last name, and his sister for academic achievement," she chirped. She laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world. I waited for Dad to correct her, waited for Mom to realize, waited for someone, anyone to notice that they had twisted my moment into his. No one did. Even my teacher, when I tentatively brought it up, smiled kindly and said, "At least your family is proud. That's what matters." I learned something sharp that week. It wasn't about what I achieved. It was about how easily I could be folded behind someone else, like an afterthought in someone else's celebration. The applause had long since faded, but the hollow it left inside me rang louder than any clapping ever could. As the last echoes of applause faded from that stage, so did the last shred of my belief that my accomplishments were ever truly mine. The sun had been relentless that morning, baking the public park in a way that made the picnic tables shimmer at the edges. Still, I didn't care. I had packed the sandwiches myself, folded the napkins with little purple bows, arranged the cupcakes into a shaky tower. I wanted this birthday, my 13th, to be different, to be about me, just once. Friends from school started arriving one by one, their laughter cutting through the heavy heat like a blessing. For a brief moment, the world felt right. We tossed frisbees, sprawled on picnic blankets, traded secrets we swore we'd take to our graves. Then Colby arrived. He sulked immediately, dragging his feet across the grass, arms crossed like the universe had wronged him by existing. I caught Mom's worried glance and Dad's sigh, but they both shook it off. "Let him settle," they said. "He's just having a moment." Moments later, as if on cue, Colby stomped toward the dessert table. In one swift, violent motion, he knocked over the cupcakes. Frosting splattered across the ground like tiny explosions. He tore open the gift bags lined neatly on the table, scattering cards and tissue paper across the dirt. The park fell silent. My friends froze, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or pretend it hadn't happened. I stood motionless, hands clenched so tightly my nails dug crescents into my palms. Mom rushed forward, scooping Colby into her arms. "He's overwhelmed," she cooed loudly enough for everyone to hear, as if explanation alone could erase the destruction. No one looked at me. No one asked if I was okay. By the time the last of my friends offered strained goodbyes and trudged back to their parents' cars, the sun had dipped low, throwing long shadows across the ruined table. That's when the real blow came. "You could have handled it better," Mom said, folding a sticky napkin into her purse. Dad nodded grimly. "You're older, Shanda. You have to set the tone." I stared at them, stunned. The frosting still caked my sneakers. The birthday banner hung lopsided above the crumpled tablecloth. Yet somehow, in their eyes, I had failed. I didn't argue. Arguing never worked. It just gave them more words to throw back at me. Instead, I started gathering the mess, scraping frosting off gift bags, collecting torn wrapping paper, nodding like a good daughter, even as something inside me started to calcify. Forgiveness had always been my default, swallowing hurts, stitching up invisible wounds. But standing there in that park, watching my own celebration dissolve into a lecture, something inside whispered a dangerous thought. What if I stopped forgiving them? The Christmas tree stood limp in the corner of the living room, its branches weighed down by a handful of tired ornaments and a string of lights that blinked unevenly, like they couldn't decide whether it was worth staying lit. The whole house smelled faintly of overcooked ham and stale air. I clung to the thought that maybe, just maybe, this holiday would be different. I pressed the wrinkles out of my secondhand sweater, wrapped a simple gift for Mom and Dad, and set it neatly under the tree. I watched from the couch as Colby tore into brightly wrapped presents, video games, a new tablet, clothes with tags still attached. His laughter bounced off the walls. When it was my turn, Mom handed me a small package, hastily wrapped in newspaper comics. I unfolded it carefully, pretending not to notice the lack of a bow, the absence of anyone even watching. Inside was a sweater, oversized. It smelled faintly of attic dust. I pressed it against my chest, murmured a soft, "Thank you," and tucked it onto my lap like it was precious. No one said anything. No one even looked. I excused myself quietly and carried the sweater upstairs. In my room, I turned it over in my hands, noticing the worn cuffs, the stretched neckline. Something hard twisted in my chest. The tag was still there, half torn, but unmistakable. Colby's name scrawled in black marker. They hadn't even bothered to remove it. I sat on the bed, the sweater pooled in my lap like some cruel joke. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Not this time. I had cried too much for them already. When I confronted Mom later, my voice barely more than a whisper, she waved her hand dismissively. "At least you got something," she said, already turning back to the television. "At least you got something." The words etched themselves into me, deep and mean. I realized in that moment that my presence in this family was tolerated, not celebrated, obligated, not cherished. The crack that had started at the canceled birthday, that had splintered with the stolen bracelet and the broken bicycle, widened into a canyon. I didn't throw the sweater away. I didn't burn it in some grand act of rebellion. I simply folded it carefully, tucked it into the back of my closet, and closed the door. And just like that, another invisible boundary went up, thicker, higher, colder. That Christmas, I stopped asking to be seen. I stopped reaching for anything from them. As the Christmas lights flickered weakly against the window pane, I realized something far more permanent had been left off their gift list that year. Me. After Christmas, I spent most days barricaded in my bedroom. The living room downstairs was just noise now, a constant current of voices that barely seemed real. My room, small and battered, became my fortress. It started with a sticky note. Just one. I scribbled the words late one night when sleep wouldn't come. "You are enough." I pressed it onto the inside of my closet door, like planting a seed no one else could see. One note turned into two into 10. Every hurt I couldn't voice became ink on paper. You exist even if they don't see you. You matter even if they don't say it. My closet door blossomed into a field of bright, desperate affirmations, each one a silent rebellion against the life outside my walls. For the first time, I felt a strange kind of strength, not loud or obvious, but steady, quiet, breathing just beneath my ribs. Maybe I couldn't change them, but here, behind my door, I could build something that was mine. One afternoon, when the January light was thin and gray, Colby burst into my room without knocking. I barely had time to move before he stood staring at my closet, his mouth curling into a grin. "What's all this?" he snorted, ripping one sticky note off and waving it in the air. "You are loved? Wow, Shanda, that's pathetic." I froze. He grabbed a handful more, laughing as he read them aloud, twisting the words into something meaner with each breath. I lunged for them, but he darted out the door, shouting for Mom and Dad to come see my crazy wall. By dinner, everyone knew. And by the next day at school, so did half my classmates. The notes turned into jokes whispered in hallways, giggles as I passed by, sly glances that cut deeper than any slap. And when I looked to Mom and Dad for help, they only shook their heads. "He's just a kid," Mom said. "You're too sensitive." "Don't make a scene," Dad added, as if their son hadn't just gutted me with my own words. That night, I sat on my bed staring at the empty patches on my closet door, where my defenses used to be. My chest felt hollow, scraped clean, but something new stirred in the emptiness. Not the familiar ache of hurt, but something colder, sharper, a resolve forming quietly in the rubble. Maybe I couldn't stop them from laughing. Maybe I couldn't make them see what they'd done. But I could stop hoping they would. As they laughed at my deepest hurts taped to the wall, I stopped waiting for them to change. I started thinking about how to change my world instead. Denise's house smelled like vanilla and hope. It was a small, crooked little place on the edge of town, with furniture that didn't match, and walls crowded with old photographs. But it was warm. It was safe. It was the first place in months where I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. It was late February, the air still clinging to winter's last bite. Denise had whispered her idea to me after church the week before, a secret stitched between casual words, a small gathering, just a few friends, just for me. I almost said no. After everything, part of me didn't believe I deserved it. Part of me was afraid it would only hurt more when it ended. But the larger part, the one that had survived so many small betrayals, clung to the offer like a life raft. The party wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. Denise baked cupcakes herself, the frosting uneven but glorious. She hung a banner made from construction paper that spelled, "Happy Birthday, Shanda," in lopsided letters. A handful of friends came, bringing hand-drawn cards and homemade bracelets. And for a few precious hours, I wasn't a background character. I wasn't invisible. I laughed until my ribs hurt. I blew out candles that spelled out my name, correctly, brightly. I dared to believe, if only for an evening, that I mattered. But happiness in my world never lasted long. A photo, just one. Someone posted it on Facebook. Me, grinning beside Denise, holding a cupcake with frosting smeared across my nose. It didn't take long. The next morning, the storm hit. Mom cornered me in the kitchen, phone clutched in her hand, cheeks flushed with fury. "How dare you embarrass this family?" she hissed. "After everything we've done for you." Dad stood in the doorway, arms crossed, silent but simmering. Denise was the real target, though. They called her manipulative, said she was poisoning me, turning me against my own blood, whispered about her failures, her loneliness, as if kindness was something only broken people offered. I stood there and listened to them tear her apart, brick by brick. I could have apologized, could have begged for forgiveness like I always did. But something inside me, something Denise had watered that night with her homemade cupcakes and hand-cut banners, held firm. I realized that sometimes loyalty isn't about blood. It's about choosing the people who choose you back. Denise had chosen me. Now it was my turn. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply looked them in the eye and said, "You don't get to decide who loves me." Then I turned and walked away, my heart pounding but steady. I stood between the wreckage of two worlds, the family that never wanted me and the one person who did. And for once, I knew which side I was on. The restaurant smelled like fryer oil and cheap candles, the kind you could buy in bulk at the dollar store. I stepped through the door and immediately regretted it. Everything about the place screamed rushed, half-hearted, like someone checking off a box they didn't want to be bothered with. The table near the window sagged under the weight of an oversized lopsided cake. Balloons floated limply above the chairs. Dad waved at me with a grin so strained it might snap. Mom fussed over the candles, lining them up with exaggerated care. Plastic smiles, hollow apologies. I felt it all before I even sat down. The cake was the first blow. "Happy birthday, Sandra," it read, in uneven red icing. Sandra, not Shanda. I looked up, expecting someone to notice, to laugh it off, to offer even a flimsy excuse. But they didn't. They clapped anyway, urged me to blow out the candles as if the mistake didn't matter. As if I didn't matter. Colby stole half the attention, throwing a tantrum because the flavor wasn't chocolate. Mom soothed him immediately, promising ice cream later if he behaved. I watched from across the table, invisible at my own celebration. The worst came during the toast. Mom raised her glass of watered-down soda, smiling brightly at the group. "To Colby," she said, her voice lilting and proud, "for being such a good boy lately." A few awkward chuckles rippled around the table. "And to Shanda," she tacked on hastily like an afterthought, for turning another year older." The room spun for a second, or maybe it was just inside my chest. I sat there, smiling so tightly it hurt, feeling every molecule of air press against me, reminding me just how small I really was. That was the moment it clicked. Really clicked. I didn't need them to see me. I didn't need their crooked smiles or their hollow toasts. I didn't need them to fix anything because I finally understood. I was never broken. Quietly, without a word, I stood. The chair scraped lightly against the tile, but no one stopped talking. No one asked where I was going. I stepped out into the evening, the cool Charleston breeze brushing against my skin like a benediction. The sky above was painted with the last strokes of sunset, deep purples bleeding into bruised oranges. I walked, past the flickering neon signs, past the muffled laughter from other families and other restaurants. I kept walking until the air felt lighter, until my heart stopped trying to prove anything to anyone. In my mind, I started drafting a different kind of future, one where I wasn't defined by their indifference, a life where love wasn't something to be earned by shrinking myself smaller. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I saw myself, and for the first time, that was enough. If there's anything my story has taught me, it's this. You don't need someone else's permission to value yourself. You don't need to shrink, to beg, to twist yourself into something smaller just to fit into spaces that were never made for you. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is choosing to walk away from the people who refuse to see your worth. Healing doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to stop chasing approval and start building a life where you already belong. Have you ever had to find the strength to choose yourself over people who were supposed to love you unconditionally? I'd love to hear your story. Where are you watching this from? What would you say to your younger self if you could? If this video touched your heart, drop a 1 inch in the comments or tell me where you're tuning in from. If you didn't connect with it, I still want to hear from you. Tell me why and where you're watching. Let's keep the conversation going. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us share more voices, more journeys, and more healing. See you in the next story.